Plymouth native Miriam O'Neal is a poet, reviewer, and biographer with numerous published works, award nominations, and recognitions. Tiff Phillips sat down with Miriam to talk about her background, her work, and what truly fulfills her.
All right, I'm with poet, reviewer, and biographer Miriam O'Neal. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So I need to ask you, where'd you grow up? What's your background?
I grew up in Manamet, a half a block from the beach. My parents moved there when I was 2, and I moved away briefly and ended up moving back, and I've been here ever since.
And why Plymouth?
Why did they move to Plymouth?
Yeah, why have you stayed in Plymouth?
Oh, why have I stayed in Plymouth? Well, I commuted to Boston for work for many years, and it was a straight shot up the highway. This was pre-commuter train. And then I commuted to Quincy. Then I commuted to Middleborough. It was an easy commute to most places I worked. I worked in high tech for a long time.
Oh, wow. That is quite the switch, and now you're writing.
And now I'm writing, yes.
Wow. So did you always know that writing was going to be a part of who you are?
Yeah. Yeah, I did. I was writing poems when I was in the 3rd grade. When Kennedy died, I wrote a poem for his children that was used at the school service, memorial service for Kennedy. So yeah, I guess I read somewhere that if you're not sure what to do with your life, think about what you wanted to do when you were 11 years old. Because it's pre all that pressure and hormones and all that stuff. And what I wanted to do was write poems and put words on paper. So I did.
What does poetry itself do for you? How does it fulfill you?
Oh, it fulfills me. It fills me is a better way to put it. It gives me a sense of having sorted something, some interior, some feeling or sense of something. Not so that I can tie it up in a neat bow and put it aside, but it makes it easier to live with mysteries. And we all have, I think, emotional and sensible meaning of the senses, mysteries in our lives. And for me, poetry sorts that and helps me hold it without worrying about it.
Do you think poets in general have to have a certain amount of empathy, feeling, or do you think anyone can be a poet?
I think poets are people who pay attention in a different way. Attention comes from the verb attend, and I think poets attend the world in a different way. We listen differently. And that's not to say that we're all dreamy-eyed, staring at the moon people, but our attention, we see with our peripheral vision as much as straight on, and it's that tiger in the grass feeling of, oh, there it is. Oh, there it is.
And so how would you characterize your poetry?
That's most of my poetry is what I would call narrative lyric. Usually it tells a story, and it's lyrical, and it can't get away from that. And I don't want to, but that's mostly what I do. And I work in forms more than I used to. So working in forms asks of the poet to let go, because which sounds weird. Form sounds like it's enclosing you, but a form, if you let go of yourself inside the form and just not try to do a thing, but let the form help you do it. It works. A really good example of a form doing its work is a pantoum by Zvinya Orlowski, who lives up in Marshfield. She's Ukrainian-American, and she wrote a poem in honor of when Oksana Bayul won the figure skating gold in the Olympics, and it was just after Ukraine had become an independent country again. Excuse me. And the pantoum is a poem that is a form that repeats certain lines. And by using the pantoum form, she was able to capture the sense of, she's describing Bayul going around the rink. And we all have seen figure skaters as they round the oval, doing certain things at certain places. But that continuous looping through around the rink is in the form of the poem, which is so cool.
That's, yeah, the movement
Yeah.
depicted in that. That's
Yeah.
incredible. So say you have writer's block. How do you get over that?
Patience.
Patience.
Patience and just putting a few words on the page.
Mm.
Not setting yourself up for failure. Not it's almost like what you don't do as opposed to what you do. At the minimum, just being patient with yourself will get you past it will get me past writer's block, but also paying attention to the fact that I'm not writing and listening for what's going on in my head. Because, even when you're not putting the pen to the paper or the fingers to the keyboard, writers are writing. And I heard Mary Oliver say this in a speech she gave. She said, you're still a writer when you're in the dentist chair. When you're in the chair, you're still a writer. It's not like you're a writer at your desk and then you go to the dentist. When you're in the dentist chair, you're still a writer.
What other advice would you have for people who are just starting out maybe in poetry or writing in general?
Read.
That's
Read
good
a
one.
lot. And don't read what makes you comfortable only. Do read what makes you comfortable. And start with your contemporaries. Start with people who are writing now, whose voices and diction you would recognize. Don't start with Virgil. Don't start with Keats. I love Keats and do get to Keats. But I would say start with a voice that sounds, a diction that sounds familiar to you, a tone of voice that makes sense to you. Because if you know who's writing now and then you move backwards into the canon and beyond the canon, you move to the voices that make sense to you, whether it's Jamaica Kincaid or Audre Lorde or Elizabeth Bishop or Billy Collins or anybody who speaks to you now is a good place to start for reading. And also go to open mics and go and hear the features. Don't just go to read your own poem. Go to hear what other people are doing. Find your people. Writers need people. It's a very isolating process, writing is. So we need our people. We need the other writers who are also in their isolation and need to come together.
Who do you or what do you look to for inspiration? What gets you going?
That is a really broad question.
Yeah.
I should say the answer is very broad.
Right.
Because it depends the day. I have poems that have come first thing in the morning as I'm waking from a dream. As a matter of fact, the title poem of this book, We Start With What We're Given, came to me. I woke from a dream of about the play Romeo and Juliet. And there's a line after they've been married, Romeo and Juliet have married and they have their one night of wedded bliss. And they wake up in the morning and it's time for him to go because he's killed her cousin. And they hear the lark. And she says, "It is the nightingale." And he says, "No, it's the lark." And I just woke up with those lines in my head and a whole 2-page poem came out of it. So that can happen. But also, we all have a subconscious that's always at work. Subconsciousness, I guess you'd call it. And sometimes when I'm just sitting still, apropos of nothing, some image or a few words will come. And I use my cell phone and send myself notes. I write as much, I just let the words come. I send the note to myself in my email, and then I work from that. So there are very different ways of finding the poem. Birds give me poems all the time.
Can you tell us about a few of your works?
Okay, I told you about we start with what we're given. For instance, a third of my first book, We Start With What We're Given, is dedicated to the artist Esther Laurie, who survived the Holocaust. And I found her, I was reviewing a book for someone, a translation of a Polish writer, a Polish poet, and in one of his poems, he refers to the only woman whose art survived the Holocaust. And I thought, well, that can't be too hard to find out. But I knew that there were more than one. I knew that more than one person's art had survived. Not a lot, but some. So I started digging around, and I discovered this woman, Esther Laurie. And her art ended up being hung in the courtroom in Jerusalem during the Eichmann trial in support of the oral testimony of some of the other survivors. So I thought, well, she's interesting. She's important to know about. And she haunted me for about 6 months, and I just wrote poem after poem after poem about her life. I did research. I read about the ghetto that she lived in Lithuania, that she was imprisoned in Lithuania, the Kovno ghetto. And then she was in 3 different slave labor camps, and she survived. So I learned about her life, and then I wrote a series of, I think there are 17 poems dedicated to her.
So what do you think your greatest accomplishment has been? Personally, professionally, what are you going to look back on and say, yeah, I did that?
Oh. Well, I think I know that my mother had great hopes that I would publish poetry. So she's not alive anymore, and I'm pleased to be able to say that I did. To know that she would be pleased for me. I'm pleased. I don't think I have a greatest accomplishment, but I have a lot of accomplishments I'm glad about. I'm glad that I've been able to shepherd Poetry, the Art of Words, which is our monthly reading series here in Plymouth, for the last several years, and be part of it for more than 10 years now, because it's a real community of poets, of young poets, meaning new to poetry poets, and young poets. And I'm pleased about that. I'm glad that I had the chance to do that. I'm glad when I get an email from someone, as I did last week, from a man who runs a workshop in Boston, and he has been running workshops for a long time. He has a lot of poets come through his doors, and he sent me an email and said, I always ask my new students to bring a poem by someone who they admire, and they'd like to talk, a poem they admire and they'd like to talk about. And last week, 2 people brought poems that I had written.
That's incredible.
Well, don't you think?
Yeah.
So yeah, I have a lot of things to be grateful for and glad about. So that's my answer.
What does the future look like for you right now?
Well, I'm working on a biography at the moment. I'm also writing poetry. It looks busy. It looks wonderfully, happily engaged with words.
And you wouldn't have it any other way?
And I would not have it any other way.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. It was great chatting with you.
Thanks, Tiffany, for having me.
Of course.
Bye-bye.
For more of Miriam's works, visit miriamoneal.com.
Hey friend, thanks for stopping by. If you like this video by the local scene, share the love and give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe.